So, Clem, you say you found water? Like clean bottled water? Luke's eyes widened with curiosity. His mouth hung open like a dog, panting for a bone. The thought made Clementine think of Sam, but she pushed it out of her mind before it could make her sad. Forcing a smile, she nodded. Yes, Troy and I found two big jugs of water in the museum. We were able to carry them back, free arms between the both of us. Nick casted a amused glance over at her. That bastard still around? It didn't seem like anyone had much faith in Troy's survival, or at least they didn't care all that much. Clementine couldn't say she blamed them, all things considered. Still, she replied, Yeah, well, I think so. When I left him with Serena and Rebecca, he seemed weak. I hope everything's okay. It hadn't been the smartest move, but she had known what happened to Sarah and was in a panic state. At least she would have made sure they were safe first. What, Clem? You left him with the of them? The color faded from Luke's face. The brush of death had nearly clearly putting them in more than on a little edge. What if he turns, Clem? Oh God, the baby! Or what if he tries to hurt them? Did you even think that through? I mean, I know it's desperate time, but Luke, come on, lay off, Nick hissed. Eyes narrowed towards his face. Clem, help us get Sarah out of there. All that seemed to be a mental slap in the face to Luke needed. The man had ran a hand through his hair, stammering, You're right, Nick. Shit. I guess we're all on edge right now. Last thing we need is me going crazy. Don't worry, Clementine added with a confident tone, trying to seem as more sure than she was. They were safe. I left them with my hatchet to defend themselves if they needed to. Luke brightened. Nice thinking, Clem. After that, she smiled back. She added, We should probably head back there as quickly as we can, though. Don't feel like much leaving those girls with that guy. Nick snorted. Can't say he's more likable guy in the world. Think he called us chickens once. Once? The auburn-haired man then raised an eyebrow, a small smirk on his lips. More like 1,000 times. You know how many times I heard? Come on, chickens, get to pecking. As my wake-up call? As if he couldn't think of anything else to say. That was when he took us to our jobs. Probably couldn't, Clementine added, a humorous glint in her eyes. Troy wasn't the brightest, and yet they were all aware of it. Her comment had earned a simultaneous snicker from both Nick and Luke, some of the previous tension dissolving before their eyes. Didn't he call himself a rooster? Luke remarked. Think he did. Nick snickered, shaking his head as if in disbelief, though the guy was more of a lapdog than anyone else. Now hold on there, Nick, Luke replied. I think he was on to something with that rooster talk. He surely acted like pretty much the leader all the time. Clementine's eyes glistened with amusement, pleased to see how they would be relaxing. If only a little who knew belittling Troy would lighten the mood this much. It wasn't like they were doing anything wrong anyway. The man deserved much worse. It was only for fun. Clementine was confident that neither that Nick or Luke were actually going to throw him out. She trusted them to trust her. After all, despite their justified vendetta against Troy, they were better than him. Is that man going to stay with us? A small squeeze to her hand at the soft words uttered next reminded Clementine that Sarah was with them. Not that she'd forgotten about her per se, but it was just as she got caught up in the moment. Still, she nodded at her friend, wondering if Sarah would have a problem with that. Troy had been all too eager to smack her if he was intended to back at Carver's. He had paraded himself around them constantly, some sort of threat. Clementine wouldn't blame the other girl if she was afraid of him. For now she murmured back, trying not to show too much of the truth that annoyed her, until he can go on his own. She really didn't know when that would be, but probably wouldn't come fast enough. And honestly, how long could he survive with one arm anyway? Sarah bit her lip, lowering her gaze in response. I don't like him. He hurts people, acts like he wants to do it, but I trust you, Clem. I mean, you saved him for a reason, didn't you? Clementine really wished that she had a good answer to give to her friend, but all she could respond was, I just didn't want to be like Carver. The other older girl's eyes widened behind her glasses for a moment in shock, mouth drawn to a nose shape to utter disbelief. Clem, you could never be like him. He's so mean and you're so nice. You're nothing like him. Sarah's naivety was showing again. Clementine wouldn't call herself nice, of course, but that was besides the point. She feared of something become some sort of monster that would twist a human into someone like William Carver. If she lost what was left of her humanity, she would be no better than a walker, mindlessly stepping around through the world and surviving only because nothing had killed her yet. Lee wouldn't have wanted her to be like that. She didn't even want to be like that, though it was constantly running through her mind. Clementine had just shoved her worries aside and proved to herself that she was not a monster, justifying it with her treatment of Troy. Carver sure seemed convinced, she muttered, eyes narrowing. Carver wouldn't be bothered with Troy, Luke pointed out, eyebrows knitted down sympathetically. He'd never go as far for anyone, especially for someone he didn't like much. She fought through and she heard Sarah and Nick chime with an agreement, but she was too lost in her thoughts to acknowledge it. Merely gazing at her friends, she squeezed Sarah's hand again and shook her hand while saying nothing. The rest of the group had their trip and Parker's Run was all walked in silence. Parker's Run was more than occupied since the four of them returned. Clementine's eyes lit up when she found Kenny, Mike, Bonnie, Jane, Sarita, and Rebecca, all standing outside of the tent with a smile, hurried around towards them, relieved that they all survived the small walker's herd they had fought back against in the forest. You're all okay, she breathed, giving an audible sigh. Sarita bent down to Clementine and Sarah's level, flashing a smile of her own. I'm so glad to see you two are okay. Bringing gaze up to Luke and Nick, she added, all of you. Sarah, honey, are you doing okay? Rebecca asked, her lips drawn in the slight frown. In a way, Clementine was glad that the older girl wasn't alone to grieve like Sarah. Rebecca had lost a loved one recently too. Not that she was happy Carlos and Alvin were dead, but as to say their misery loves company. Sarah nodded and her eyes, downcast and still puffy. A film of tears were clouding behind the frames of her glasses, but she held her hands, gripping one another tightly, in obvious attempt to stay strong. Chewing on her lips, she whispered, I'm not okay, but I know I'm not by myself. You're right, baby, you're not alone. You never were. Without another word, Sarah wrapped her arms around Rebecca, tightly embracing around her swollen belly as best she could. More tears freely streaked their cheeks, matching the ones starting to roll down the woman's face. Quiet sobs were racked through the both of them, and everyone else seemed to be backed up to give him space all at once. Kenny turned to Clementine next, a warmth glow when behind his one-gazed eye. I'm glad you're okay, Clem. Didn't think those walkers back there could do any of us in, especially after what we just walked through. I'll say, Mike scoffed from behind him. His arms were crossed and head still raised. I still don't know how we managed to get out of there in one piece. Jane rolled her eyes. I told you it worked. They were a little more than senseless animals after all. Our smell is what makes us stand out to them, and nothing else mattered. That's mighty resourceful of you, Jane, Bonnie commented, rubbing her cheek with the stickly rotten blood still caked onto her skin. Can't say it's the most glamorous raid to escape, but at least we're all grateful that did us the trick. Spare me the gratuities, Jane replied icily. You all helped bring down Carver, so in a way we're even. After giving a smirk to herself, she added, Still, I think we should have went through my plan to use Troy as bait, though. Mike snickered. That would have been funny for sure, though I think he's got plenty of karma from the way he looked a moment ago. Clementine looked around, noticing that their newest addition wasn't standing around with the rest of the group. Where is he? She asked, her gaze trackling down the campground as if the one-armed asshole would just magically appear as the usual scowl planted on the features. Sarah pointed to the tent and her voice low. He passed out a little after you left. We just let him sleep. Amusement reflected on her eyes as she added, Truth be told, I just didn't want him to wake to bother us. I could see that, the girl replied with a smirk, gazing towards the tent. I'm gonna go check anyway. Half expecting a Walker version of Troy to lunge at her at once, she opened the tent. Clementine cautiously pulled back in the flap and peered inside, just poking her head in as quickly and quietly as she could, just in case. She had learned it a long time ago that it didn't hurt to hyperventilate sensitive of the world around her, of any danger that may sneak up behind in the corner. However, thankfully nothing happened. Once she drew back the opening of the tent, she noted Troy's still form exactly where she had left him. He was half sitting and half lying down in an awkward-looking position, but with his arm it was clear that he was just trying in vain to get comfortable, and his face was all scrunched up in pain, sweat gleaming off of his skin, and even thin hair was even pale in the light. The rope tourniquet seemed to be holding up, stopping the blood from flowing out of the wound, but it was still quite worn out from the use that it had been in the past few hours. Clementine didn't know how much longer it could hold up, in all honesty. Just as I thought, Sarita's voice suddenly next to her made Clementine jump. The woman's lips were pressed together in a thin line, her eyebrows furrowed in thought. Quietly she crouched down and crawled over to the man, placing both of hands on his shoulders and slowly turning him from his side onto his back. But of course Troy had to be difficult. Even while unconscious, he let out a groan at her touch, trying to swat her away with his remaining hand. Unfazed, Sarita said, Troy, you must lay on your back. When he continued to whine, she added, You'll only make it worse if you flip onto your wound. He flinched and his teeth gnashing together in frustration to the pain. To Clementine's surprise, Sarita gave a gentle hushing sound and murmured, You need to help yourself if you're going to heal. Clementine was very impressed by her compassion. This was the same man that stood by and watched Sarita's boyfriend be beaten, and that had struck Clementine to herself when she tried to help. Troy didn't do a damn thing to stop Kenny's pain, even prolonging it all for Carver. Just for a moment she allowed herself to wonder why Troy was so dedicated to the man, and whether or not would just be relieved at the time, ideals, or was even just scared out of his mind. But after that moment, Clementine reasoned to herself that no intention could possibly justify his behavior. Still, she couldn't help but feel sort of sorry for him in his state. Noticing Clementine watching her, Sarita turned to her and explained, I know he does not deserve any of this, but I just don't have it in my heart to let anyone suffer. I think that's one of the remains of the old world that sticks with me, even now. Clementine blinked. What do you mean? I used to be a nurse, the woman explained, pressing 2 fingers to Troy's wrist to gauge at his pulse as if inhabited alone. Paratrix, but still, taking care of people is what I'm used to, and we took an oath to help anyone, no matter who they are. With a smile, the girl replied, You just don't have to justify anything, Sarita. You're a good person, and that's what good people do. You're better than Troy and Carver and most people I know. Thank you very much, Clementine. I think the same could be said for you, as you helped him in the first place. Sarita said with a smile. Clementine blushed at the praise, giving the grin of her own in response. After Troy had finally given up and let himself lay on his back, the 2 of them crawled out of the tent and rejoined the others. They were all still discussing things that were sort of the scene of the same, but Sarah had parted from Rebecca and was standing closer to the tent. She gave a small wave to her friend, and their gazes met. Sarita then turned back to Clementine with a warmth in her eyes. I should be taking a look at the rest of you now, I suppose, especially since Carlos. The girl closed her eyes and nodded with a frown. They would mourn for him, surely, just as they mourned for Pete and Walter and Alvin, but there was no time to grieve to hold them back. Curious, Clementine asked cautiously, If you know the medical stuff back in house, why didn't you help Carlos look at Kenny? A distant look then crossed Sarita's deep brown eyes before she closed them. Her face softened into sadness. I'm just so thankful he's all right. I know I wasn't able to help, but... Before she could continue, Sarah approached him. Clem, I think something's going on with Rebecca. Biting her lip, Clementine glanced over the woman, who was holding her belly ways off, hunched over. Rebecca seemed weaker than she seemed to be since they escaped Carver's, using Bonnie as a support and her expression distorted into pain. After their exchanging a glance with Sarita, the girl then followed Sarah over to the rest of the group, just in time to catch Mike's asking, "Are you okay? How does it feel?" Rebecca then shot him a glare and hissed, "It feels wet, that's how it feels." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, biting her lip. "Her water broke," Bonnie replied, flashing a worried glance over her own at the rest of them. Clementine watched as Sarah's eyes began to lit up in response, surprisingly knowing that what she was referring to. That means the baby's coming. But my dad, he would have been able to." Just for a moment she had let her head fall and squeeze her eyes shut in pain, but her fists tightened after glancing over at the smaller girl next to her. Sarah probably didn't have to have anyone think of her, but Clementine noted the words and whispered to herself, barely audible even with the silence of the clearing, I have to be brave like Clem." "Fuck," Nick cried, taking off his hat and running through his hand through his hair. What do we do?" "No way Rebecca can travel like this," Luke commented, shaking his head. Jane bit her lip, her tone of her voice still passive and despite the uneasiness expression. "She's going to make a lot of noise, and they'll be able to smell her too. We have no choice but to ride this out and lock ourselves in." "In where?" Bonnie asked, her head swinging around. "There ain't no place to hide here, Jane." "Troy and I found water," Clementine reminded them. "In the museum out down the road. It didn't look safe, though there might have been another place around. There was more secure." "Do we even have time to look around?" Nick asked, worried, reflecting back his gaze at her. Sarita stepped forward. "Everyone calm down, please. Before all this, I worked as a pediatrician. I am able to help deliver the baby, but I can't do it alone. Do any of you have experience with this sort of thing?" When no one raised their hand aside from Kenny, she added, "All right then, Kenny and I will take care of the delivery. The rest of you should find some things for Rebecca." Kenny nodded. "Save some of that water we all found for her. She's definitely going to need it. And blankets. The rest of you all figure out where we should go." Clementine beamed. "We found a coat for her. It was next inside the tent." "Oh, perfect. I'll go grab that and search for the perimeters for lurkers. Nick, help me out?" Nick merely nodded, his hand clutching the metal pipe as he still had held from the trailer park. "I'll check that building by the river," Jane announced, turning to walk around without waiting for any approval or response. Okay. Mike and Bonnie, you want to go check out the museum and other buildings out there and see if there is anything else?" Luke asked. "Not that we don't trust you, Clem." Clem then gave a doubtful look, crossing her eyes with a dry smirk. His response was merely a smile of his own. "Where should I go?" she asked. "That's up to you," Bonnie replied. "And of course I'm more than happy for you to come with me and Mike, but I figure you're better off checking out that building by the river with Jane. I'm afraid she's just going to take off. We don't even know if she'll stick around or not, but we need all the help we can get into bringing that baby here safely." Clementine thought for a moment. She knew absolutely nothing about Jane, so maybe it might be a good idea to go investigate with her. Besides, it seems like Bonnie and Mike weren't going to find much in the place that she already searched. It'd be pointless to return there. Nodding, she replied, "Yeah, okay. I'll go check it out." The redhead let out a sigh of relief. "Thanks, Clem." Quiet, shaky voice sounded next to Clementine. Sarah was hugging one of her arms tightly, pressing it against her side as her anxious gaze turned to the ground. I sort of know how to help with babies, I mean. My dad, he told me some things." Sarita's smile deepened. "That would be wonderful, Sarah. I'll show you a few things, too, so you can learn even more." That seemed to really do the trick, for Sarah's eyes once more then glowed brightened behind her and then the rose-rimmed glasses. You really do that? I mean, is it okay?" "Of course it is," Sarita chuckled. "And it would help us greatly to have two people with medical knowledge, don't you think?" With more confidence than anyone had just seen show in her days, Sarah exclaimed, Yes! Luke smiled and then turned to the group. "All right, Sarita, Kenny, Sarah, make sure Rebecca's safe. Rest of all, we're looking for anything that can help. More blankets, more water, disinfectant, anything like that. We have some disinfectant inside the tent for Troy. Rebecca can use that." Clementine offered. Oh shit, I almost forgotten about him. To be honest, Luke admitted. Once we figured out where we need to go, we need to get him there too. Does he seem like he can move on his own? Clementine's eyes narrowed coolly. We're gonna have to make him, I guess. She would have to let him sleep for now, but if it came down to it, he had to be able to make it himself move her to a safe place. No one could carry him either. If he wanted to survive, he would need to start pulling his own weight. Alright, looks like all of us got a plan, Luke replied, scanning his gaze over the clearing, as if he had a mental checklist off-noted of what everyone was doing. His face hardened and firmly said, Let's get it on, y'all. This baby's gonna get its world safety as comfortably as possible. Jane was sitting by a picnic table by the time Clementine caught up to her. The woman's head then bowed and her eyes were narrowed in thought, lips pierced as if struggling to remember something, or perhaps forget. Are you having a staring contest with that picnic table? Clementine asked with a bit of sense of humor in her tone. She was exhausted, but couldn't help but put a light tone in her words out of habit. Cocking her head back to glance at Clementine, Jane stood up, brushing herself off and retorting, It's nothing, kid. I guess I kinda got lost in my thoughts. I do too sometimes, the girl admitted. So, Jane began, brushing off the previous topic. The gift shop's up the stairs. Looks something like we could use. God knows we could use a break. Nodding, Clementine followed Jane's gaze over to the staircase. Blinking in thought, the woman silently walked towards it, only glancing behind her to notice if Clementine was following her. Once she knew she was, Jane then started up the staircase with Clementine at her heels. But right at the top of the stairs, once they both stood on the deck, raised high above ground, Jane stopped and turned around, her brown eyes fierce as she stared at Clementine, down like a lioness at the piece of her prey. The girl couldn't help but shrink back at the intensity of her gaze. Look, kid, Jane murmured, if I'm going to be honest with you, I know you wouldn't have made it this far if you weren't so smart, but I still gotta warn you. Warn me? Yeah, Jane's voice and took an exasperated tone. Bringing Troy along, it was a bad idea. Your group is cracking. I've seen it before, and he's only going to make things worse. He tends to screw things up just by being around. Clementine gave the woman a fierce look glare back, not accepting the role of prey in this conversation. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't stand by and watch him get eaten, if I was able to help. He wouldn't have done it for you, Jane said with a frown, and if you ask me, there's a weakness in numbers. A lot of times it's just no better than being on your own. You know, bad stuff happens when you're alone too, Clementine retorted. Bad stuff happens whether you're with someone or not. Jane's eyes narrowed. But your odds are better if you're alone. If you're alone, Clementine reasoned. There's nobody to watch your back, no one to help if needed. Had Jane been alone all this time? Clementine couldn't help but wonder. But really, it wasn't something that she wanted to dive further into. She knew that being alone wasn't a good thing, and there was no one to watch your back, no one to help you if you needed, no one to offer you help to either. Plus, running into loners frightened Clementine a little, if only because the stranger who lured her away from Lee, he had been on his own, with no one to help you out of trouble. There was also no one to help you not cause a trouble either. The less people in your group, the more likely you'll start to go into your own rules, or at least that's how Clementine justified it. Carver was the only exception to that, as he had this whole community living under his own rules, oppressed to those who would think otherwise. Jane pressed on. How much help is Troy? Even if he wasn't a complete piece of shit, he was only one arm. Not much to help if you're being attacked by a walker, and he needs 2 hands to fire a rifle. He's pretty much just useless to your group. Good point, really, but Clementine didn't really want to think in those terms. Useful and useless. It was kind of thinking that Carver established it at Howe's, and he didn't like it one bit. They were all survivors, and she felt that she needed to be good people to help one another. Adults and children were the same now, boys and girls, in this world. You were either dead or alive. That was it. No other labels to track on. We don't leave friends behind. She recalled herself saying that back at Crawford, when the odds were turned against Ben. Troy wasn't a friend by any mean, but she still wasn't going to abandon him or anyone else in the group. No one was getting left behind on her watch. But she didn't exactly have an answer to satisfy Jane. The woman just kept prattling on, continuing on about Rebecca and her baby, and how the group would be weakened. She described how stupid it was to have a baby in the world like this, like Rebecca asked to carry a child at the worst time possible. If you're all gonna do is criticizing our group, why are you even here? The girl mumbled, a bit irritated to the woman's high and mighty act. She didn't know any of their stories and couldn't judge them any more than they could judge her. I just want to make sure that you know what you're doing, kid. Like that jacket? Clementine glanced down at the bright blue jacket, giving her a questioning glance to Jane. What about it? It looks warm, but a walker would fit right through that material. Under her breath, Clementine added, Troy mentioned that I really stand out in the forest. Maybe that's why some idiots wear cameo. Guess he just has a few brain cells to make it this far. Or that Carver dressed them every morning. After they both snickered under their breaths, Jane continued, But no, you would need green or a gray leather jacket. My sister Jane, she always... The woman trailed off, her gaze traveling downward. Clementine quirked her brow, confused as to why she stopped, but she didn't press it. They only had the more important things to worry about. Anyway, without another word, she then turned to explore the deck. The view was nice, though. Being only in 2 small flights of stairs, the place looked very empty overall. A few flags decorated outside, and a large cannon sat in the middle of the deck. 2 telescopes on the map on the outer edge. The small opening looked as if, like a resting area, was at the edge of the dock. The garage had been set nearby, and it was a giant locked garage next to it. Instantly, Jane crouched down the door, examining the lock. Check this out, the gate's still locked, which means that hopefully no one's gotten into whatever's inside. Hope it's most important enough. Clementine then gave a good look, commenting, It looks secure. Rebecca could have her baby in there. That's just what I was thinking. I'll try to pick a lock. Reaching into her pocket, she brought out her nail file and gave a smirk. Curiosity is not overrated. Clementine just raised her eyebrow at her, watching her as she tried to use the nail file to pick at the lock. After a few tries, however, it became clear that her tool would not be enough. Cursing under her breath, Jane said, You know, I think we could try something a little heavier. You think you could find around here that could burst out this mechanism? Not like I have a choice. Nodding, Clementine gave out a quick scan around her surroundings, deciding to head straight for the one only place that she hadn't really got to look at yet. The small nook at the garage door. Based on what the map at the edge had said, this deck looked like it had been used for observation. The telescopes confirmed to be some sort of tourist attraction anyway. The small opening next to the garage looked to be the rest of the area of some sort, with a few posters of the Civil War and hanging on the wall with some benches. Nothing that small opening would break through the lock, but it was still something in the matter of the garbage can. With a scowl to herself, Clementine almost didn't bother, but she figured that if there was anything in there, it would be worth just to check. Sighing, she then rolled up her sleeve, took off the top of the can, she looked in. What she wasn't expecting, however, was a large medical bag stuffed into the can, sticking out of the sore thumb along with it, otherwise useless trash inside. Blinking curiously, Clementine then fished it out, trying to turn to Jane to call, Hey, I found something over here. Jane approached in her own curiosity, teased by her own mysterious bag. Like a pair of cats, and the two of them stared at the object, as if it were a new jiggling toy. Without prolonging it too long, Clementine decided just to open up and satisfy them both. Her jaw visibly dropped and zipped it open. Holy shit! Jane gasped quietly, and her eyes widening. Inside the bag were tons of medical items, from antibiotics to painkillers, to water to wash them down, antiseptic bandages, everything they had been hoping for, just sitting there on a silver platter. This was exactly what the group needed, and for whatever reason, they had been granted it. But Clementine wasn't stupid. This wasn't hers, and it wasn't the group's. It belonged to someone else. Clearly someone who had just stuffed it into the trash can to store it for later. Could Clementine really take these things from them? What if the people needed them just as much as their group did? Her stomach twisted with a churning blend of guilt and nausea. It was just like the station wagon they had found in the forest after that nightmare at the St. John's Dairy. Everyone had voted to take the things. Even Lee, he said that their stuff was theirs now, and that they needed it. Who had abandoned it weren't around to claim it, so it was free for the taking. Even back then, Clementine knew it wasn't right, and she still knew it wasn't right to take things that didn't belong to her, especially things that people needed. If it was a more serious matter, she would have to deal with the holding deaths on the others for the consequence. Considering and swallowing hard, she then glanced at Jane, who was already picking up the bag. "What are you doing?" she asked, already fully aware of what the woman's answer would be. "This is a gold mine, Clementine. We put this stuff to good use. Think about it. Luke's pretty messed up from Carver's, Kenny's eyes. It's still a mess. Rebecca with the baby," with a disdain she said, "and Troy missing his arm." "But it's not ours," Clementine argued. "It wouldn't be right to take it. Whoever left it here needs it, or pretends to come back and get it. We'll just have to watch out for them. Then look, I'm not leaving this stuff here. We need it too much. But, Clementine, just look at me." After the girl did as she instructed, Jane continued, "If Rebecca or the baby dies because we didn't have this medicine, that would just be much worse, wouldn't it? Think about her. Think about Kenny. Think about the baby." Her shoulders hunched over. Clementine then gave a defeated nod. It seemed like Jane was taking a guilt trip route with this, and it was working. If anything were to happen to anyone in their group because they didn't get the medicine, she would have been even angrier with herself. "Okay," she finally murmured unhappily. Jane nodded. "I'm going to work on the lock. Go to get the others and we'll settle up here. Once they see the medicine, I swear you'll see, they'll agree with my thinking." "I know," the girl hissed slowly. "They always seem to." "Clem! Oh, God, thank God! Come here!" Luke then waved across the clearing as Clementine returned from the observation deck area. Finding most of the group gathered around the map at the center, she hurried forward to meet them. Luke's tone was not all to setting her at ease. The look on the others' faces worried her as well. Was something wrong? Once she reached them, she asked the same question, only to see their faces of range of emotions, from concern to indifference. That was enough, and it was a hint of what was happening. It didn't seem to be anything with Rebecca, but their newest addition to the group. "It's Troy, isn't it? What's wrong with him?" Clementine asked, suddenly wondering if he had died since she had last seen him. Sarita, who has been missing from the group, cleared, poking her head out of the tent, along with Sarah. "Come see for yourself," she murmured, her lips then drawn together at the tight line. With a heavy sigh, the girl then crawled into the tent, noticing instantly that something was definitely wrong. She had last seen Troy. He was on his back asleep, though he had looked pained, and it was nothing compared to what he looked like now. Face contorted in agony, Troy's eyes were half open, and his body was shaking and gasping for air, remaining fingers scrunched into tight fists, and his legs drawn upwards to his chest and laid on his side. The man looked at the verge of death. He was mumbling something, sweat trickling down his cheeks as his cracked lips trembled out in the quiet, nonsensical whimpers. His raps didn't make any sense, but she managed to catch something around the eyes of cold. Was that all he wanted to say? Clementine was speechless. Once the pounded guard dog then looked like he was about to be put down. It made her feel sick. "He has a high fever," Sarita explained, frowning. "I don't think he's going to make it with any sort of medicine. But Rebecca, we need some for her, too." Sarah then finished, gaze trailing over Troy sympathetically. I don't want anyone to die." The three of them decided to leave the tent, just in case if things got worse so suddenly. Neither of them really had a weapon that would be quick enough to put down a walker in such a close range. Rejoining the others outside, they all stood in silence for a few moments. Now that the medicine Jane had found would come in handy, not that Clementine was particularly happy about it, Troy had been better thanking her a million times over than to never utter a word of complaint again, assuming he survived. "We have found some medicine at the observation deck. In fact, we should get everyone there now." "Can we move him and Rebecca up there?" Clementine asked. Rebecca spoke up. Don't worry about me. I'll be able to get up there without any trouble." "I'll help," Bonnie offered, patting the woman on her back. "We'll go as quickly and safely as we can. Don't worry." Rebecca flashed a grateful glance in response. I guess I could drag Troy up here, Nick murmured, rubbing the back of his neck uncomfortably. If no one else can, I mean. Hey, you volunteered, Kenny replied, exchanging gazes with Mike. And he's all yours, Vanilla Ice. Crossing his arms, Nick nodded, probably regretting his decision to speak up at all. Clementine then smiled and then thanked him, which earned her a grin in return. Nick should smile more often. She reflected. It was nice to look on him. So, at the recap, Luke then spoke up, breaking her thoughts. Bonnie's helping Rebecca, Serena, Kenny, and Sarah, and I think you should go with her. Nick's bringing Troy up, and Clem and Mike, I think you both should go with them just in case. Jane's already up there. I'll bring in the rear. Don't see any lurkers just yet, but you never know. When they all nodded in agreement, they all began their respective duties. Bonnie, Kenny, Sarita, and Sarah began to help Rebecca up the stairs, bringing the medical supplies that were leftovers from the drugstore. As they were on their way, Nick slid into the tent, bringing out a barely conscious Troy. The sick man struggled to keep to his feet, narrowly falling a few times, just standing there. Come on, Troy, Nick urged. We can't stall. The amputee just looked at his head, hissing a low, fuck you. With a roll in his eyes, Nick grabbed tightly onto Troy as best he could, and they began to half drag and half carry the man towards the observation deck area. Mike and Clementine followed swiftly with Luke behind them, picking up anything that the others had left behind. Once they were at the top of the observation deck, it looked like Jane had already got the garage door open. Inside was a gift shop, but Clementine didn't have time to observe. Rebecca was screaming now, the pain only growing worse as the baby got closer to being born. When she saw all of them appearing at once, Jane's eyes widened and then stepped back, allowing everyone to enter before her. The baby's coming, Mike. Lock the gate, Bonnie yelled. On it, Mike did, as he instructed, locking the gate behind the group as they all scurried into the gift shop. Sarita, Sarah, and Kenny all hurried the pregnant woman inside, Mike running down behind them. Nick and Troy then followed, with Luke right behind them. Clementine then hung back for a moment and approached Jane, who was holding the medicine bag. Need this? Jane asked, curling her lips into a smirk. Not wanting to admit that the woman had been right, Clementine then just crossed her arms. It's not like we had a choice, she grumbled. Well, you do have the choice now, Jane began, as they both crouched down and opened the bag. We only have so much medicine here, Clementine. You're going to have to make a choice on who gets it first. Clementine knew that they all expected of her. What should he do? All the right thing was Rebecca was in labor, in tremendous pain, and needed painkillers first and foremost so the baby could come out safely into the world, and the othermost things that kept the group going. The promise of a new life of this hell world that brought all hope to them, and on the occasion of something that can't be wasted. But on the other hand, Troy's fever looked like at the verge of spiking. Nick had placed him a bit away from the group inside the shop. Clementine could still see that the way his face was in twisted agony. She had to look away, back down with the medicine. He needed antibiotics if he was ever going to survive, and if she delayed, he could die. They needed to both help, but it wasn't like giving them take any hours. It wouldn't be even quick seconds either. Both Rebecca and Troy were delirious right now, and would have to be calmed or forced down to take their respective medicine. Rebecca needed painkillers to ensure that she had strength to deliver the baby. Troy needed antibiotics to bring his fever down and survive. Both of them needed medicine now, but there was only one she could deliver to first. What should she do?